Food. It's a common denominator and sometimes a defining characteristic of who we are. It brings together friends and families. We can all think of a favorite holiday meal. Food unites communities, it defines cultures, and it's even been attributed to the rise of some civilizations. We are in a revolution right now, and things are changing. People are starting more than ever to think about how the food they eat impacts their health and the health of the environment. My name is Dawn Card. I'm the 7th grade life science teacher here at North Broward Prep, and today I'm going to talk to you about how food, specifically growing food, has become part of my conversation as a teacher, as a parent, and as a member of the community. How we grow food and how it impacts our health is something that I've been fascinated with for a long time now. When preparing for this talk, it took me on a journey back through my life to look for these connections, these moments that made this connection for me. And there were specific experiences. My dad, he was always growing things. He still is. Here he is in his yard, his happy place. I grew up and spent most of my life living in the tropics, in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands and in Puerto Rico. Some of my earliest memories in St. Croix are playing at the banana plantation in our backyard. An evening I can see the fruit bats flying around from fruit trees to fruit trees. From my dad, I learned this love of growing things, especially things that we can eat. And today we share this. Every year we plant a vegetable garden together. After college, I knew I wanted to travel and explore the world. I didn't have a lot of money at the time, so I looked at my options and I decided to become a Peace Corps volunteer. So fluent in Spanish and with a science background, they sent me to El Salvador as an agroforestry volunteer. I was assigned to a small village up in the mountains, a farming village named San Ramon. And as you can imagine, mountains, steep hillsides, that made for some challenges in farming. Soil loss at devastating rates left that land void of any nutrients needed to grow crops. So it didn't matter what they were growing, corn, beans, tomatoes, coffee. Without that nutrient-rich soil, they were heavily dependent on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And I can remember that almost all of the land in El Salvador was farmed. Very little land was left untouched. And with that came the loss of biodiversity, original forests, natural resources. This 4 years in El Salvador deeply impacted my understanding of growing food and farming. It's when I first made the connection that the choices that we make, the food that we eat, directly impact the farmers that grow our food. And the environment in which it's grown. So after I left the Peace Corps, it also deeply instilled in me a love of teaching. And so it wasn't long before I took this conversation of food into the classroom. It happened not far from here in Aventura, Florida, where I was a 6th grade science teacher. The teacher before me had planted this beautiful garden with her students. I loved this idea, getting kids outside, experiencing their natural surroundings. It all made perfect sense, except for the fact that there wasn't anything to eat in the garden. So we changed that with the help of my dad and a lot of hard work building raised beds and planting seeds. We created this beautiful space that students wanted to come out and eat lunch in. This was transforming for me, a space where kids could connect with food. It just made sense that they wanted to eat out there. And so it began. I started to explore ways to teach science using a garden as a laboratory. The connections were endless: life sciences, earth sciences, physical sciences. Fast forward 10 years, and now I find myself here at North Broward, a school that values the road less traveled and supports wild ideas of growing food vertically in towers, building raised self-watering beds, and raising fish to grow food. Together with another colleague and our middle school students, we have created a space where we are growing food 3 different ways, in between 2 buildings on top of cement pavers. This is the future of food. And this can be emulated in any urban space around the world, and it is. That's where we get our ideas and inspiration. There are people all over who are experimenting with innovative, non-conventional ways of growing food. So how do I bring food into my curriculum? Well, as a life science teacher, it's pretty easy. After all, we are what we eat. Not just metaphorically, but literally down to the molecular level of our being. See, we eat food, we break down macromolecules, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and then we use those molecular parts to build us. We literally are what we eat. To some, this simple idea is pretty profound. So you mean I'm part salt and vinegar chips and chocolate-covered almonds? Well, yeah. So from cells to organisms to ecosystems, this idea of we are what we eat is really fundamental. When we get to the level of ecosystems, the conversation requires us to ask some hard questions. How do the daily decisions that we make impact our environment? What is the true cost of getting that burger or that rainbow roll to our plate? What is the cost of raising and growing that food, of harvesting, of transporting, packaging, processing, and then cooking and finally disposing of? It's easy to come to the conclusion that this is not the most efficient system. And with our population projected to reach 10 billion by mid-century, we have to get it better. Practices of buying and growing locally, reducing waste and packaging, all of these have big impacts. Farmers markets that are popping up everywhere is changing the term of the word fresh, and now things like farm to table and food miles are part of our conversation. This is awesome. So education can raise awareness and bring children into the conversation of food. But it also naturally happens at home. Every time we put a meal on the plate, every time we make a purchase at a grocery store, at a restaurant, or at a farmer's market. Kids easily pick up on these choices. Is this grape tomato actually grown in Florida? Is there extra added sugar in this juice? Is this chicken hormone? So as consumers, we have a decision or a choice every day we make a purchase. So, as educators, as young adults, as parents, this conversation. Remember, after all, we are what we eat. Thank you.